Story 1. The bell that rings at midnight. Never open the door when the bell rings at midnight, because that bell never rings to call someone home. It rings to let something in. The year was 1726. In the northern mountains of Transylvania, hidden between towering mountains and endless black pine forests, there was a small village called Vala Noire. In the old local language, the name meant the Black Valley. The village was so isolated that during the winter months, heavy snow would completely cut it off from the outside world. But isolation wasn't the reason people feared Vala Noire. They feared the old stone church standing in the center of the village. St. Orla's Church. A massive black bell hung from the church tower. The church had been abandoned for almost a century. Its doors had been sealed with stone. Its windows had been covered with wooden boards. No one prayed there anymore. No one rang the bell. And yet, every winter night, at exactly 12:17 a.m., the bell rang once. Only once. DONG. Then the entire village would become completely silent. The people of Vala Noire knew the rule. On nights when the bell rang, no one was allowed to leave their house. No one was allowed to look through the windows. And if someone heard 3 knocks on their door, they were never, under any circumstances, supposed to answer. Because the oldest people in the village used to say, the first knock is made by the living, the second is made by the dead, and the third. They never finished the sentence, because even speaking the name of the third knock was forbidden. Chapter 1. December 1894. Winter had completely swallowed Vala Noire. Snow covered the mountain roads. That night, an old postman named Matthias Valku was making his way home through the mountains. Matthias was 55 years old. He had grown up hearing the same warnings as every other child in the village. Never go outside when the bell rings. Never look toward the church. And never answer the third knock. But that night, he had a letter that needed to be delivered. The letter belonged to an old woman who lived at the very edge of the village. Her house was called the Black House. The villagers called it Casa Negra. The house stood far away from the other homes, right beside the forest. An old woman named Elena Vasile lived there. Her husband had died many years ago. Her only son, Nikolai, had also died. No one knew exactly how. Some said he had disappeared in the forest. Others claimed he had fallen from the mountains. And some people whispered that Nikolai had never actually died. Matthias didn't believe the rumors. He only knew that an important letter had arrived for Elena, so he had to deliver it. The clock on his pocket showed 11:43 p.m. Matthias walked through the snow. Nothing moved around him. Only the wind. The pine trees swayed in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. A small lantern hung from Matthias's hand. Around his neck was an old silver cross. His father had given it to him when he was young. If you ever have to walk through the Black Forest alone, his father had told him, keep this with you. Matthias had never asked why. But that night, for the first time, he wished he had. As he passed in front of St. Orla's Church, the flame inside his lantern suddenly went out. Matthias stopped. He reached into his pocket for a match. And then, the sound came from the church tower. DONG once. Matthias froze. He pulled out his pocket watch. 12:17 a.m., exactly on time. He didn't look toward the church. He couldn't. Every child in Vala Noire was taught the same rule. Never look at the church when the bell rings. Matthias started walking faster. But after a few steps, he heard footsteps behind him. Crunch, he stopped. The footsteps stopped too. He started walking again. Crunch, crunch. This time, the footsteps were closer. Matthias wanted to turn around, but he forced himself not to. Then he heard a woman's voice, right behind him. Matthias, He froze, because he knew that voice. It was his mother's voice. Chapter 2. Mateus's mother had died when he was only 12 years old. He hadn't heard her voice in decades. But that night, standing alone in the snow, he heard it clearly. "Mateus, look at me." Tears filled his eyes. He tried to convince himself it was only the wind. It was his imagination. No one was really there. But the voice spoke again. "I'm cold." Mateus's entire body trembled. His mother had said those exact words on the night before she died. "Give me the blanket. I'm so cold." Mateus closed his eyes. He kept walking. The footsteps behind him became faster. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then, a hand touched his shoulder. Mateus almost screamed, but he didn't turn around. He ran through the snow until he finally reached the black house. He slammed his fist against the door. "Lena, open the door." No answer. He knocked again. "Lena." Finally, a weak voice came from inside. "Who is it?" "It's Mateus." Silence. Then Alina asked, "Did the bell ring?" Mateus froze. "Yes." The old woman's voice trembled. "Then you brought her with you. Who?" No answer. "Alina, open the door." "I have your letter. Leave it outside." Her voice suddenly became terrified. "Leave the letter and go." Mateus didn't understand. "But go." Mateus placed the letter on the ground. Then he stepped backward. And that's when he heard it. 3 knocks. From inside the house. Knock 1 second of silence. Knock another second. Knock. Mateus stared at the door. He wasn't sure what frightened him more. The fact that someone was knocking, or the fact that the sound was coming from inside the house. Alina screamed from behind the door. "Don't answer." Mateus stood frozen in the snow. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Chapter 3. The next morning, Mateus was found dead. His body was lying in front of the black house. There were no wounds, no blood, no signs of violence. But his eyes were wide open. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, as if he had seen something no human being was ever meant to see. In his right hand, he was still gripping the silver cross. And inside his tightly clenched fist, the villagers found a small piece of paper. Only 4 words were written on it. The third one entered after Mateus's death. The villagers stopped going anywhere near the black house, but 3 days later, a stranger arrived in Vala Noire. His name was Thomas Reed. He was a young historian from England. He studied ancient European folklore and religious history. Thomas had discovered several old documents mentioning St. Orla's Church. One line in the documents caught his attention. It said, "The bell does not announce the dead. It announces their return." Thomas believed it was nothing more than an old superstition. He had no idea that his research was about to lead him into the most terrifying chapter of his life. Chapter 4. Thomas stayed at an old village inn. That evening, he met an elderly priest named Father Ian. Thomas told him about his research. "I'm studying St. Orla's Church." The priest's face immediately changed. "Do not say that name again," Thomas smiled. "Why?" The old priest stared at him. "Because that church was never built for God." Thomas stopped smiling. "Then who was it built for?" The priest didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and locked the door. Then he closed the curtains. "If you truly want to know," Father Ian said, "come with me tonight." "Where?" "Under the church." Thomas thought the old man was joking. He wasn't. That night, Father Ian took him to St. Orla's Church. From the outside, the building looked abandoned. But beneath the church was a hidden stone staircase. The stairs descended deep into the earth. They counted nearly 50 steps before reaching a large underground chamber. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest. Father Ian opened it. Inside was a leather-bound book. On the first page was a date, 1726. Thomas opened the book. The first pages contained religious notes. But then, the story began. In the winter of 1726, a woman named Mirela Vasile disappeared. She had been sick for months. The villagers believed she was close to death. One night, Mirela died. But after her death, the church bell rang by itself. The next night, Mirela was seen standing outside her own house. She was dead, but she was standing. Her eyes were open. Her face showed no emotion. Her husband opened the door and let her inside. That same night, her husband died, then her 2 children, then 3 neighbors. And before every death, the same thing happened. 3 knocks on the door. Knock, knock. Thomas slowly closed the book. But Father Ian stopped him. Read the last page. Thomas turned the page. Written there were the following words: the dead who return do not want to enter their own homes. They want to enter someone else's. Thomas looked up. Why? Father Ian whispered. Because once someone lets them inside. He paused. They are never alone, Agadeth. Chapter 5. That same night, the bell rang. Dong. Thomas looked at his watch. 12:17 a.m. Even deep beneath the church, they could hear it. Father Ian immediately blew out the candle. Don't make a sound, Thomas whispered. We're safe down here. The old priest looked at him. No, there was terror in his eyes. We're only hiding. Then they heard footsteps above them. A slow step. Thud. Another. Thud. Then the footsteps began moving down the staircase. Step. 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 Thomas stopped breathing. The footsteps reached the bottom. Silence. Then a woman's voice came from the darkness. Ian. Father Ian's face turned pale. The voice spoke again. Have you forgotten me? The priest closed his eyes. Thomas whispered. Who is that? Father Ian covered Thomas's mouth. But it was too late. A voice came from the darkness. You called me. Thomas's blood ran cold. Because the voice sounded exactly like his own. Chapter 6. The next morning, Father Ian was gone. Thomas was alone beneath the church. The old book lay open in front of him. A new sentence had appeared on the final page. It hadn't been there the night before. Now she knows your name. Thomas dropped the book. He ran toward the village. But when he reached the surface, every door in the village was locked. No one was outside. The streets were empty. Only footprints covered the snow. But there was something strange about them. Every footprint came from outside the village and stopped directly in front of someone's door. None of them went back. Thomas knocked on one of the houses. Is anyone there? No answer. He tried another. Nothing. Finally, he returned to the inn. He locked the door. Then he locked every window. He waited for night, but he didn't know something. That night, the bell wouldn't ring. The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. Chapter 7. 12:17 a.m. No bell. Thomas stared at the clock. 12:18. Nothing. 12:19. Knock. Someone knocked on the door. Thomas froze. Silence. Knock. The second knock. Thomas's hands began to shake. He knew what came next. But before the third knock, a voice came from the other side. Thomas. Thomas closed his eyes. It was Father Ian's voice. Open the door. Thomas said nothing. The voice came again. I'm hurt. Thomas remained silent. Let me inside. Still nothing. Then something began flowing underneath the door. Thomas looked down. It wasn't water. It was black. Thick, dark liquid. And floating inside it was an old silver cross. Father Ian's cross. Thomas stepped backward. Then the voice changed. Now it was his mother's voice. Thomas. Tears filled his eyes. His mother had died when he was a child. Son. Thomas bit down on his lip. Open the door. His hand slowly moved toward the door handle. Then, a whisper came from the corner of the room. That isn't your mother. Thomas turned around. There was no one there. The whisper came again. That isn't your mother. Thomas realized something. The voice was his own. Chapter 8. The third knock finally came. Knock. Then the entire house became silent. Thomas didn't open the door. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, he gathered enough courage to approach the window. He didn't open the curtains. He only looked through a tiny gap. A woman was standing outside. She wore a long black dress. Her head was lowered. Long hair covered her face. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking directly at the window. Thomas stepped backward, slowly. The woman raised her head. Thomas saw her face. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only a huge black empty space. And from that darkness, a voice whispered, "You saw me." Thomas screamed and fell to the floor. Then, knock. Something touched the window. Knock. Again. Knock. A third time. But there was no one outside. Then the knocking started at the door behind him. Then the kitchen door. Then the staircase. Then every door inside the house. It sounded as if hundreds of people were standing around him, all knocking at the same time. Knock, 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 covered his ears. Then one voice whispered, "Let one of us inside," another voice said. "Only one," another. "We're cold." Then hundreds of voices spoke together. "We've been waiting for you." Chapter 9. Thomas survived until sunrise. When the sun came up, everything stopped. There were no footprints outside the door. No woman stood near the window. Everything looked normal. Thomas packed his belongings. He decided to leave the village. But when he opened the inn door, he saw the villagers standing in the street. Men, women, children, all staring at him. No one spoke. Thomas approached an old man. "I'm leaving." The old man shook his head. "You can't. Why?" The old man looked behind Thomas. "You opened the door last night." Thomas's heart stopped. "No, I didn't." The old man looked terrified. "You didn't open it." Then he pointed behind Thomas. "But something came out of your room." Thomas slowly turned around. The inn door was open. From inside, a wet footprint led onto the snow. Then another. Then another. The footprints were heading toward St. Orla's church. Thomas finally understood. The thing he thought had been standing outside his door had never been outside. Chapter 10. Thomas returned to the church. He knew there was nowhere left to run. He went beneath the church again. He opened the old book, but the final pages had completely changed. New words covered them. The first opened the door because of love. The second opened it because of mercy. The third opened it because of fear. The fourth will open it because of curiosity. Thomas stopped breathing. Below those words was one final sentence. The fourth will be the last. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. "Thomas." He turned. Father Ian was standing there, but something was wrong. The priest had no shadow. Thomas stepped backward. "You." Father Ian smiled. "I died a long time ago." Thomas's voice trembled. Then, Father Ian looked into the darkness behind Thomas. "Morella." Thomas froze. Every candle in the room went out at once. In the darkness, Thomas heard a woman's breathing, slow, cold. Then, a whisper came directly beside his ear. You said my name. Chapter 11. Thomas ran. He sprinted up the stone staircase. He burst through the church doors and ran into the snow. The sky was covered with black clouds. Snow fell heavily around him. He ran toward the village, but after several minutes, he realized something. He was back at the church. He ran again. The same thing happened. The church, the inn, the black house, the church, the inn, the black house. The village had become a circle. No matter which direction he ran, he always returned to the same places. Finally, Thomas found himself standing in front of the black house. The door slowly opened by itself. Alina's voice came from inside. "Come in," Thomas shouted. "No." The old woman spoke again. "If you stay outside, she will see you." Thomas stopped. "Who?" Alina whispered. "The thing standing behind you." Thomas slowly turned around. There was nothing there. But in the snow, beside his own footprints, was another set. 2 footprints. Right behind him. Someone had been standing there. Thomas felt an icy breath against the back of his neck. Then a voice whispered into his ear. "All this time, you thought you were running from me." A pause. "I was walking with you." Thomas closed his eyes. And at that exact moment, the bell of St. Orla's church rang. DONG, once. Chapter 12. The next morning. Thomas Reed was gone. The villagers never found him. His bag was discovered in front of St. Orla's church. Inside was his notebook. On the final page, he had written only one sentence. "If you ever read this story and you hear 3 knocks on your door tonight, do not open it." The villagers tried to burn the notebook, but the fire wouldn't destroy it. The next morning, the notebook was back inside the underground chamber beneath St. Orla's church. From that day forward, the villagers created new rules. No one was allowed to go outside alone at night. No one could open their windows when the bell rang. And whenever a stranger arrived in the village, they were never allowed to stay overnight. Because the villagers knew something now. Mirela didn't just bring back the dead. She brought back their voices. She could speak in the voice of your dead mother, your father, your brother, the person you loved most. And the most terrifying part was, she could learn your voice too. The end of day, Vala Noire is nothing like the village it once was. Many of the houses have collapsed. St. Orla's church still stands, and the black bell still hangs from its tower. No one knows who made it. No one knows what Mirela really was. And no one knows what happened to Thomas Reed. But some of the oldest villagers still say that on certain winter nights, when the fog becomes thick enough to swallow the mountains, a black bell can still be heard from beyond the forest. Dong. Exactly at 12:17 a.m., and whenever that bell rings, every door in Vala Noire is locked. Every light is turned off. No one speaks. No one looks toward the windows, because they know. The bell means someone has arrived. Then, the first knock comes. Knock. Everyone stays silent. The second knock. Knock. No one even breathes. Then the third knock. Knock. And after that, a familiar voice comes from the other side of the door. Sometimes it sounds like your mother. Sometimes your father. Sometimes someone who died many years ago. But on the worst nights, the voice on the other side sounds exactly like you. And it whispers, "Open the door. I'm standing outside." So, if you ever listen to this story alone in your room late at night, and suddenly, you hear 3 knocks on your door, remember this. The first knock may really be made by a living person. The second may belong to someone who is dead. But after the third, whatever is calling your name will no longer be standing outside. It will be waiting right behind you before you go. If you like this scary story and want to hear more creepy stories, spooky legends, and unsolved mysteries from around the world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any new nightmares. We upload brand new scary stories every week, designed to keep you breathless. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories come true. See you in the next nightmare.